Welcome. Rabbi Julia Andelman here, Director of Community Engagement at JTS, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second session of our new webinar series, Living a Life of Meaning. I think this here on the New York area, it's a cold, rainy day, and the holidays are behind us. So to me, it feels like a particularly fitting day to sort of go into a reflective space and continue what we've started, drawing on Jewish sources to think about help us think about what's most meaningful in our lives in this time of uncertainty. I want to especially welcome any first-time attendees, and you can view past sessions on the JTS website. You can use the same link that was in the email you got earlier today from Lynn Feynman. Our session today, as you know, is Generosity, Gratitude, and Faith, Rav Eliyahu Dessler's integrative approach to creating a meaningful life, with Rabbi Eliezer Diamond, who is the Rabbi Judah Nadich Associate Professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. And don't be alarmed by the very long source sheet from today, where Rabbi Diamond will guide us through certain excerpts. And if you don't know yet who Rav Eliyahu Dessler is, you will know and appreciate him by the end of today's session. So just to review our Q&A protocol, which is different from our previous series, Rabbi Diamond will pause periodically a few times during the class to take your questions, and we'll have some Q&A at the end as well. And for this series, we're using the chat feature for Q&A. So you should go ahead and send your questions to me in private chat. To open your chat, you go hover your cursor over the bottom of the Zoom screen, click on the chat icon, and when we get to Q&A, I will select from the questions that have come in and share them with Rabbi Diamond. And please note, in our new system, you're only able to chat with JTS staff, not with the whole group or directly to the faculty. So we know that that's a little different from the past. We hope that it will work better for everyone. If you have questions that are just that are technical or logistical, you should send those to Rabbi Tim Bernard or Lynn Feynman, the other JTS staff who are helping us with this session today. If you are joining us by phone only, unfortunately, you can't, we don't have a question system for that, so hopefully you can join us through Zoom for a subsequent session. You have the source sheets for today in the email that you received from Lynn, along with the Zoom link, and we'll post a link in the chat shortly in the chat. Sorry about that. And on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce one of my favorite professors from my years in rabbinical school, Rabbi Eliezer Diamond.
Thank you. Now, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me well. Okay, so as Julie was speaking, I was trying to think of a suave way of doing this, but I don't have one. And as she was speaking, I realized there's something that I wanted to read from one of the volumes that is upstairs in my real office. You're going to have to give me 20 seconds. Watch this. Hello again. So I feel that I have a tough mission today, tougher perhaps than usual, because we're all going to hear things that on the one hand I think could be very life enriching. Some of them will be hard to hear. And here's the funny thing about Musar. Some people don't like listening to Musar because they feel it's obvious. Everything that the Balei Musar say, or many things they say, are obvious. Be a good person. Yeah, I'm down for that. And then some people also have trouble with Musar because it sometimes seems counterintuitive, and also because sometimes it asks some things that are hard of us. Let's talk about what we mean by the word Musar. Musar is a form of spiritual and ethical self-discipline. It means that you're a major avoda, and I'm going to use that pronunciation as opposed to avodah, in the spirit of the traditional Muslims. That's the way they would say it. You're my avoda, my work, my holy work, is the lifelong creation of, recreation of, shaping of the self. That is my first and foremost mission, divinely ordained mission, as far as the Baal Musar is concerned, the Musar master is concerned. And Musar thinking is both austerely dichotomous. There are a lot of crossroads and there are a lot of either ors, but it is also subtle. So in other words, it's easy to say, be a good person, serial murderer. No, the Torah wants me to be a good person. But how I do that, how the path leads me there, is very, very subtle. And I want us to see those two elements of Musar. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about Rav Eliyahu Dessler, and that's actually why I went upstairs. This is the volume. This is the photocopies that you have are English renderings, as the translator, and more than translator puts it, who was a student of Rav Dessler, of a 6-volume work called Michtav Eliyahu, Letters from Eliyahu, from Rav Eliyahu Dessler. They actually were published not in his lifetime, but afterwards. They were notes based on Musar lectures that he gave, also letters that he wrote, and this was put together by both his family and his students. Rav Dessler was born in Europe. He went to the yeshiva of Kelm, which was a well-known Musar yeshiva, where students, besides studying classical rabbinic texts, studied Russian language and literature and mathematics, and of course, Musar studies. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Eventually, he fled Europe. This was before, I forget the exact year, I think it was actually during World War I. He fled to England. And at that time, there were no yeshivot of note in England. He helped start a number of yeshivot. And at the end of his life, he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He made Aliyah. And he was a mashkiach ruchani, a spiritual advisor. In other words, in a Musar yeshiva or a Musar-oriented yeshiva, besides the Roshei yeshiva, the heads of the yeshiva who would teach the traditional curriculum, almost exclusively Talmud, you would have someone who would look out for the spiritual and general welfare of the students and who would give periodic lectures about matters of Musar. But I want to emphasize that it wasn't just theoretical lectures, that Rav Dessler, like every Mashkiach Ruchani, was involved in the lives of the students. He knew them. He knew what was happening with them. And he spoke to them in both senses of that phrase. He knew how to speak to the heart of each and every individual. I wanted to read you, this is really why I went upstairs, because I couldn't reproduce this. To give you a picture of what it means to be in a Musar yeshiva, I want to read you the following paragraph. This is written by the translator, Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, who was a student of Rav Dessler. And there's a brief biography of Rav Dessler at the beginning of this. It's a 3-volume work. And in the preface, page 11, Rabbi Carmel writes as follows. In Kelm, the Musar yeshiva where Rav Dessler studied, character training was the very air that you breathed. Rav Dessler used to say that the relative with whom he stayed used to serve him day after day for years the same dish of nourishing but tasteless oatmeal. This was to train him to do without tasty food. We'll see, you have to put that in quotation marks. She succeeded, he used to say with a smile. After this protracted exercise, everything he ate for the rest of his life tasted good to him. And that's an important part of Musar. There's humor. Okay, it's very serious business, but serious things have humor to them too. So yes, he was committed to a simple life, but he knew when he was eating bad food. Okay, and here's the part that I really wanted to share. In the yeshiva, menial tasks such as cleaning the floor or cleaning and lighting the lamps were never entrusted to servants. They were considered privileges to be apportioned among the better students according to merit. Rabbi Dessler related that when he first came to Kelm, he was considered too young to be given the much coveted task of sweeping the yeshiva floor. His task was to go once a week to the post office to buy postage stamps for the whole yeshiva. Think about that. There's something so deep here. First of all, what this reminds us of is we so often think of things that we do as being outwardly instrumental. I just emptied our dishwasher this morning. So one way of thinking about what I did was I made sure that the dishwasher is now empty so we can put more dirty dishes in it. And I put the clean dishes on the shelf, so now they're there and we can find them. But if I did that mindfully, I don't know if I did it mindfully today or not, I try to do it mindfully, it really can be a spiritual exercise. If one does it slowly and intentionally, one can say, I am making order in the world in a very small way and for a very small amount of time. That thing's going to be full to overflowing in like an hour. But in this moment, in this world of chaos, I am making order. So this simple task of emptying the dishwasher now becomes a spiritual exercise that not only has an effect on the dishes, but also has an effect on me. It makes me a more ordered person. And it makes me an empowered person because I have been empowered to create some small corner of order in the world. That's what Rav Dessler is describing here. Sweeping the floor was not, that's dirty stuff. We'll get somebody else to do it. When I am sweeping the floor, I have the privilege of bringing order and cleanliness to my place of study and residence. That's holy work. It's a privilege. It's a privilege. This is the key to Musar. The key to Musar is a kind of mindfulness that looks at everything that we do in our lives as a spiritual opportunity. Okay. Now, as I said before, Musar can be very dichotomous. And let's start with the statement that, well, why should I? We'll see. You'll react the way you'll react. And this is on page 2 of the handouts. It's just, Ben Franklin supposedly said, I didn't have time to write a short letter. I didn't have time to pull out from all of these pages exactly the units that I want, and you have an opportunity to read things that we don't want. So that's why there are a lot of pages. But I did mark on page 2, on the right-hand side, page 29, what is in italics. There is no happiness in the world in material things. There is only happiness in spiritual concerns. The one who enjoys a rich spiritual life is happy. There is no other kind of happiness in existence. So says Rav Dessler. my guess that at least one or two of us are saying, really? And at some level, that includes me. So I want to understand, I want to deepen the point that Rav Dessler is making here, because this is an important starting point. And we need to begin with this starting point to be able to do the work that I hope we're going to be doing today. I don't think that Rav Dessler is saying that there is no importance whatsoever to material things or to material pleasures. I think what he is saying is that if our life is based on the attainment of material things and material experiences, then we have lost out on the gift that life is meant to be and the mission that we are meant to fulfill. If you look on the next page, on page 3, he says something that I think helps us understand better what it is that he means when he says that desire for material things is a trap. In the bracketed section on page 137, he says, we can see that craving is the urge to draw to oneself that which is now outside one. In this, it differs from a physiological urge such as hunger, which is merely the experience of a need to fill one's stomach. This is a clearly defined and limited goal. On the other hand, anyone who is unfortunate enough to fall into the hands of the money drive or other materialist craving is not in need of anything known or defined. He is governed by a novel and artificially created urge to extend his domain, to obtain that which is outside himself because it is outside himself. He does not crave the object of desire because of any intrinsic value it may possess, but simply because it is perceived as something beyond his reach. And this is what we call the drug of more. The drug of more. That's what he's warning us against. Do we want things because we truly understand the way in which they make us more fulfilled as human beings, or because they are simply something that we don't have, and maybe if we have them, things will be different? There's a book by the sociologist Colin Campbell called The Romantic Ethic and the Spirit of Modern Consumerism. Campbell says that what happens in the Romantic era is that we begin to fall in love with experiences. And he says that advertising basically is a product of the thinking and the sensibilities of the Romantic era. Like, let's say you're thinking of buying a Ferrari. That's one of my fantasies. I own a Ferrari. If I look at TV, what do I see? I see that Ferrari racing through the countryside, and after the car passes by, there's a swirl of leaves, right, in its wake. So if I want to buy that Ferrari, I'm not just buying a piece of metal. I'm buying, in my mind, the experience. I'm going to be racing through the countryside. It's going to be a beautiful fall day. Okay. I'm not remembering two things. One is, if I buy, first of all, I'm not buying a Ferrari anytime soon, but if I were, I'd probably be in traffic on the George Washington Bridge or the Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway. There would be no leaves swirling. In other words, what I'm buying when I'm buying the Ferrari is this imagined experience. And generally speaking, when we get the object of our craving, we don't quite get, sometimes we do, but so often we don't get the experience. And then we're on to the next experience. That's Campbell's point. So we bought the Ferrari. The Ferrari didn't do it. The Lamborghini's going to do it. Right? And it doesn't. And it doesn't. So Campbell is describing, he's not a Baal Musar. But one of the reasons I'm bringing Campbell into the discussion is I don't want us to see the Baalei Musar as Grinches. Okay, I don't think they're people who are just trying to pour cold water on our pleasure experiences. They're really urging us to think about where fulfillment comes from in our lives. And what Dessler is saying is that the fulfillment is not going to come from things outside of ourselves. And to the extent that the way in which we are living our lives is trying to take in always things that are not here, new things that we don't have. But to what extent is our life about shaping, transforming, finding meaning and pleasure in the things that we're doing, like emptying the dishwasher or sweeping the floor? I'm not suggesting that it will always be, it certainly is not always an unmitigated pleasure for me, but how one experiences that really depends on the degree of mindfulness that one brings to the act. And 30 minutes with a dishwasher can end up being more pleasurable than 15 minutes in a Ferrari. Okay. So how do I live a life of meaning and value according to Rav Dessler? So I want to talk about three major topics: giving or generosity, gratitude, and faith. And for Rav Dessler, all three of these are connected. Just to give away the punchline, Rav Dessler believes that there cannot be faith without an attitude of giving. Okay. So let's see how that works. Let's take a look at page 4. Start at the beginning of his analysis, his discourse on loving kindness or giving and taking. And he says, on the right-hand side, when the Almighty created human beings, actually, before we start this section, I made a few introductory remarks. Are there any questions or comments that should be addressed now?
I didn't get any questions yet. I got a couple of comments. One was someone was reading Thich Nhat Hanh talking about washing dishes as a mindfulness meditation, which is very similar to what you're talking about. Also, last week we studied Kohelet, Professor Kramer, and those first couple of quotes that you shared really brought to mind Kohelet right away. I don't know if you want to comment on a connection there or not.
Right. Well, right. Clearly, there is a connection. Right. Kohelet is a person who already has bought the Ferrari, the Lamborghini, the Porsche, and he discovers Ein Chadash Tachat Hashamesh. There's nothing new. The same thing keeps happening. I want to say, it's so hard to say this right. I tried to say it right, and I probably won't say it right now again, but I'm going to try one more time. I love stuff. I love nice stuff. And a lot of us love nice stuff. And I'm not trying to be a Grinch, and I don't think that the Baalei Musar are trying to be Grinches. I honestly think what they're doing, or what they can do for us, is to show, it's not so much about denigrating our involvement in material pleasure. It's about showing us what we're missing when we devote too much energy in that direction. the energy that we're not using to engage in the pleasures that are right at hand. Right at hand. There's a book that I can half recommend called Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert, about what constitutes true happiness and how to become a happy person. It's a little bit too flippant for my taste, but it's got a lot of good stuff in it. But I came across something in this book, and this is from one of the founding fathers of capitalism, as it were, Adam Smith, okay? And this is on page 241 of Gilbert's Stumbling on Happiness. And here is what Adam Smith says. The pleasures of wealth and greatness strike the imagination as something grand and beautiful and noble, of which the attainment is well worth all the toil and anxiety, which we are so apt to bestow upon it. It is this deception, which rouses and keeps in communal motion the industry of mankind. It is this which first prompted them to cultivate the ground, to build houses, to found cities and commonwealths, and to invent and improve all the sciences and arts which ennoble and embellish human life, which have entirely changed the whole face of the globe, have turned rude forests of nature into agreeable and fertile plains, and made the trackless and barren ocean a new fund of subsistence and the great high road of communication to the different nations of the earth. And Gilbert sums it up by saying, in short, the production of wealth does not necessarily make individuals happy, but it does serve the needs of an economy, which serves the needs of a stable society. So it's very complicated. We do need industry. We do need capitalism. Okay, I don't want to get into arguments about that. But in the pursuit of creating civilization, whatever we mean by that, Smith knows and acknowledges that we can lose sight of what creates true happiness. And by the way, the rabbis knew this too. In the Midrash on the book of Psalms, Psalm 9, the rabbis say that God saw, it says in, as we will read shortly, in chapter 2 of Breshit, God saw that the world was tov ma'od. It was very good. What is tov ma'od? Very good. Zeh yetzer hara. This is the evil impulse. Shilmale yetzer hara lo nasa adam isha v'lo haya molid banim v'lo haya ha'olam mitkayim v'lo boneh bayit. Okay. If not for the evil impulse, people would not get married and have children, and the world would not continue to exist. There would be no homes. In other words, there's a certain selfishness and self-centeredness in the human being, and there's a lot of investment in getting and spending, and that's a big part of enlightened self-interest, as it was called in the 18th century, and this is a lot of what creates civilization, and it's necessary. But if that is the sum total of our lives, then we have missed out on a lot. Okay, so now let's turn to the giver and the taker. Page 4. When the
Would you like
Almighty,
this shared on the screen?
this page? No, I mean, unless...
Okay, let me know when you want to.
Yeah, no, I think if people have it, let's just all follow along in our own copy. When the Almighty created human, thanks Tim. When the Almighty created human beings, he made them capable of both giving and taking. The faculty of giving is a sublime power. It is one of the attributes of the blessed creator of all things. God is the giver par excellence. God's mercy, bounty, and goodness extend to all God's creatures. God's giving is pure giving, for God takes nothing in return. God can take nothing, for God lacks nothing. As the verse says, if you are righteous, what do you give to God? Our service to God is not for God's need, but for our own, since we need a means of expressing our gratitude to God. Man has been granted this sublime power of giving, enabling humanity to be merciful, doing a little gender editing here, to bestow happiness, to give of oneself. God created humanity in God's own image. Sometimes the traditional Jewish theology, and I remember this is what I learned as a kid, was God created us so that we can give praise to God, which I never really got. I didn't get that. I didn't like it. Didn't make sense to me. I think what Rav Dessler is saying is God is the supreme giver because God gives the one gift that no one else can give, and that is the gift of existence itself. And we must never forget, I think, that life is a gift. No one promised it to me. I did not earn the right to be here. I simply was given this amazing gift of being alive. The risk of TMI, but I think if you make claims, you should be able to back them up with your own experience. I'm dealing with a medical issue and I don't know where it's going. And one of the thoughts that I've had to have to myself, not on death's door or anything, but it could go in a lot of different ways. And one of the thoughts that has been important for me to have is, I'm not promised life. The life that I've had is a gift. It's a present. I'm not owed it. And for me, it's helpful to view everything that's happening and the uncertainties of life and the fears that come with possible illness with that knowledge and acceptance. Life is a gift. No one tells us how long we are given that gift, but it's a gift. And humanity's role is to be a giver as well. And this is what I really love about what Rav Dessler is saying. What Rav Dessler is saying is the most godlike act that a person can fulfill is to be a giver. That's it. That's it. That's the mitzvah with a capital mem, capital M. All mitzvot flow from that. And the rabbis say that in their own way. Remember the Rabbi Akiva says, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Va'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, ze klal gadol b'Torah. The overarching principle of Torah is to love our fellow human being as we love ourselves. Okay? And what is that? That is being a giver. How do I love others? I give to them. And it's also important to emphasize that that too often we see giving and being as in conflict with each other. If I give to you, then I have less for me. What Rav Dessler is making us see and making us think about is that through giving, we actualize our full selves. When we are giving, we are not giving away something. We are fully engaging our powers and our energies to be God's agents in the world. There is nothing more powerful than that. I am at my most powerful when I am a giver. That's why in the 12 steps movement, they say, if you're feeling bad, go help someone else. Which sounds however it sounds. But speaking from my own experience, absolutely true. Because what happens? When I'm feeling down, I'm feeling diminished. I'm feeling worthless. And now I turn to someone else and I realize I have power. I have the power to help you. I have the power to lift you up. I am powerful. That is the power of giving. And again, this goes back to what I said before about the dishwasher. So if I think about giving that way, it's not just something that is outwardly instrumental. I helped you, whatever, move your piano. It also reflects back on me. I have brought some joy to another human being. I've reached out. I've made a connection. That person is a little less alone. And even though I know I don't have to say this, I will say it, that in the time in which we live right now, nothing could be a more useful and important insight of how in our isolation and in our aloneness, one of the ways up and out of that aloneness, not out and gone, but to lift ourselves up, is to lift others out of their aloneness. So we take ourselves out of that isolation and diminishment by lifting up others and making them less isolated. That, I think, is what Rav Dessler is talking about. Let's see, where are we in time? Let's stop again. Are there any questions or comments?
We do have questions. That's so powerful what you just said. It made me think, Rabbi Diamond, about how if I know my research correctly, people of lesser means, I believe, give more charity, the higher percentage to charity. And I wonder, I mean, I like to think of that sort of give them altruistic points, but I wonder also if it's sort of a coping mechanism to remind oneself of that power. That's just my editorial comment, but let me share some questions from participants. Okay, so Robert asked if you can reiterate the three-part breakdown that you gave of Rav Dessler's prescription for a good life.
Generosity, gratitude, faith.
All right, as in the title.
That's it. Now you can sign off. That's it.
Okay.
But don't.
Okay, and then Lori was responding to what you were saying about life being a gift, and and pointing out, of course, that that many lives are filled with suffering, and some of us got better gifts than others.
Yes.
And how do you work with that?
Okay, so that's one of the reasons that I spoke personally, because if somebody had said what I said without adding some personal element, I would have wanted to bash that person in the mouth. Like, yeah, life is a gift. Great. Take my life. See how much of a gift it is. That's a hard one. But like, I think Rav Dessler's answer is, I mean, I think we saw it already, really, but we can say it again, that Rav Dessler quotes, and honestly, I don't remember the second what page, and rather than flip, I'll just summarize. Says, he quotes the Mishnah that says, Ezehu ha'ashir hasameach bechelko. Who is the truly wealthy person? One who is happy with his lot, or one's lot. And Rav Dessler says, too often we understand that prescription, happy with one's lot, is, I kind of look at the life that I have as, no, that's all right. That's pretty good. All right, B+, A-. Dessler says, Sameach bechelko, Sameach there is not a passive, it's an active. We are wealthy when we rejoice in our lives, when we find the joy in our lives. Okay? And there are a lot of us out there, we have all kinds of experiences. I'm sure the collective pain in this group is a lot, because there's a lot of pain in life. But I also know, and I can only say because I can say it from my own life, that whatever my pain is, the place where we find the joy is where we go back into who we are and what we have. And we find the places where the joy resides, in who we are and in what we have. And we use who we are and what we have to magnify that joy. Okay. One of the ways we use pain is through our experience of pain, help others through their experience of pain. We know that. We know that. Okay. And there just are so many other ways. I always say to my students and when I teach in general, I just work here. I did not create the world. I did not create the rules. I don't understand why. And by the way, I want to be 100% clear. I don't let God off the hook. In other words, I don't understand why the world is created the way it is. And I'm not trying to tell you there's some larger reason understanding. I hope there is, but I don't, but if there is, it's not known to me. And that's not my job to find reasons to show myself or others why God is really okay. My job is to be a godly person. And being a godly person means finding joy and sharing joy. And I share joy by what I give to you. And you share joy by what you give to me. That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Can I
simple and really hard. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to share another comment with you. So Pam was observing how some caregivers, and I think we could expand that. I think about rabbinic colleagues in congregations or in chaplaincy, but many areas that caregivers often give to the detriment of caring for themselves, right? So it's where we can. I'm just thinking about what you were saying, how being a giver is sort of a fulfillment of our highest purpose, and being God's agents in the world, and also you can become subsumed by that. And
yes, absolutely. So let's actually read. That's a perfect segue to something that's on page 6. So this is the bracketed part on the right-hand side. So it's page 149 in the book, after those little boxes. One of our group, Rav Dessler says, right, this is obviously a Musar talk that he's giving, and he's giving it to a group of students. He's given a talk, and one of his students came back with a question. One of our group then came back with the following question. Since it is true there can be no giving without someone receiving what is giving, surely giving itself leads to evil, right? We have this very dichotomous view of the world. Be a giver, be a giver, be a giver. Don't be a taker, don't be a taker, don't be a taker. Well, how do you have givers without takers? It doesn't really work. It's kind of like, did you ever play that game Time Bomb or Hot Potato? Somebody gives it to you, you have to pass it off to the other person. All right, so, right, it follows too, there can never be a perfected world. If all human beings were to become givers, who would there be to take from them? Now, these are interesting questions. But if we devote a little more thought to the subject, we shall see that the matter is really self-explanatory. There is a great difference between a recipient and a taker. And similarly, between a giver and one from whom things are taken. We would do well not to confuse these concepts. There is the type of person who takes and lets people take from him. This is the one possessed by the power of taking. His taking arises from self-love. He wants only to take and would much prefer not to give at all. If anything is taken from this person, it is only because one is unable to prevent it. So I want to buy something from you, but as a matter of principle, whatever it is, I'm going to get the I'm going to get it bottom dollar. We have several learning experiences in life. Many, many years ago, I tutored the child of a wealthy individual. At the end, I was really young and really stupid. At the end, the wealthy person says, so what do I owe you? I said, I don't know. I really haven't done this before. And the person paid me what the person paid me. I later discovered that that was like the lowest of the lowest rate. Now, it wasn't that the guy didn't have the money, and maybe he's a much nicer guy than I. But in this moment, all I can say is, in retrospect, what I saw was a person who had a certain way of operating, at least in his business life. So it didn't matter if he was dealing with somebody who was 40 or 18. If I can get it for $5, I'm not paying $6. And gosh darn it, he got it for $5. Okay. So that he gave me, but that's not a giver. That's someone who allows something to be taken, but as little as possible. Okay. There is another person, one who gives and receives. This person is the giver, whose giver flows from the source of pure goodness in one's heart, and whose receiving immediately fills one's heart with gratitude in payment for whatever one receives. So if I am a giver, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't take. It means that even in taking, I should be a giver. That when I take from someone, I let that person know that I deeply appreciate what I have been given, and in that way give to that person. How many times have you given to somebody and it's like radio silence? Happens with, in my experience, happens with children on occasion, right? And you try to be very righteous and about it, but it's annoying, right? Like, hey, I sent you Hanukkah geld, right? All right, people are people. They're not bad people. People do it for a variety of reasons. But we know that it's very different to send your kid a Hanukkah geld check, and then on a phone call a few weeks later say, by the way, did you get the check? And they say, oh, yeah, we got the check, thanks. Or you send a check, and the next day you get a phone call. Thank you so much. So that's the act of a giver. Doesn't mean you don't take the check. You take the check. But now you've turned that into an opportunity for giving. You've turned your taking into an opportunity for giving. And Rav Dessler also says, and this really addresses what you were talking about more directly, Rabbi Engelman. There is a pit that givers fall into, and that is the pit of burnout, of giving so much and never taking. And Rav Dessler explains that what givers have to understand is that giving relies on taking. When the well is empty, there's no water to give. So taking from you so that I can give is a different kind of taking than let's see what I can get out of you. The taking of a giver is, please help me, and I appreciate your helping me be fully myself. Because when I am fully myself, I can be the giver that I want to be. And that is the gift that you are giving me when you give to me. When you give to me, you are becoming part of my giving. I had a friend who raised money for yeshivas, for the, I think it was Bratslav. He was a kind of wild and wacky guy. And I once said to him, how do you raise money? I could never do it. I cannot imagine going, I mean, I've done it and I hate it. He said, the way I think about it is, wow, I'm giving these people an opportunity to do a great mitzvah, to give tzedakah. That's my attitude going into these people. I'm here to do something for you. By giving to me, you are doing something for yourself. So again, how the act can be the same. A gives B, B takes from A. But how to conceptualize what the feelings, the emotions, the goals are can be very different. But yes, givers must be receivers, not takers. Givers must be receivers. We must receive in order to give. Important message for several people, probably everyone on this Zoom, but I know some of them who need to hear that message. Okay, shall we move on? Let's see, what time is it? Yeah, I think we're going to move on. Let's actually look at a beautiful story. I think it's a beautiful story already. This is on page 8, which really, to me, sums up the point. And I just want to say that I feel as though the Musar masters, the Bali Musar, teach the kind of Torah that I wish we would teach more in our Jewish institutions. This is really important stuff. And in our lives in general, realizing that knowing how to behave with each other needs to be learned. It doesn't just happen. And we have such a wealth of resources Jewishly to make that happen, to make us good at living with each other and how we deal with each other. And that is one of the gifts that Musar has to offer. So take a look on page 8, bottom of the right-hand side. The Torah writes of Hanoch, who was the 7th generation after Adam, and Adam walked with God, upon which the rabbis say, and here's this really weird rabbinic statement that means whatever the heck it means, and we'll see what Rav Dessler's take is. Hanoch was a cobbler, and with every single stitch that he made, he achieved mystical unions with his creator. Okay. I have heard a beautiful explanation of this in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter of blessed memory, interpretation which is indeed typical of his whole approach. He said that this midrash cannot possibly mean that while he was sitting and stitching shoes for his customers, his mind was engaged on mystical pursuits, right? Which is probably where we would go with it. And between you, me, and the lamppost probably is what the author meant, but that's another story. Okay? But Rabbi Yisrael said, can't possibly mean that. Why? This would be forbidden by the din. This would be forbidden by Jewish law. How could he divert his attention to other matters while engaged on work which he had been hired to do by others? Yeah, you want to have mystical unions? Do it on your own time, buddy, not while you're making my shoes. No, says Rabbi Yisrael. The mystical unions which Hanoch achieved were nothing more nor less than the concentration which he lavished on each and every stitch to ensure that it would be good and strong, and that the pair of shoes he was making would be a good pair, giving the maximum pleasure and benefit to whoever would wear them. In this way, Hanoch achieved union with the attribute of Hanoch's creator, who lavishes goodness and beneficence on others. This was Hanoch's mystical union. Hanoch was united and wholehearted in Hanoch's desire, single-minded ambition to attach oneself to one's creator's attributes. Of course, as a natural consequence, well, okay, here you go with it or you don't, but he says, of course, as a natural consequence, Hanoch was protected from any hint of evil or wrongdoing. There could be no question of ever deceiving or overreaching customers, even unwittingly. Hanoch's taking would never exceed the value of the work Hanoch was doing. the measure of Chanoch's giving. Okay. So I'm a cobbler. What is my goal? Is my goal to make a living, or is my goal to make good shoes? So of course the answer is yes, both. But how do I see myself primarily? What is being said here is Chanoch says, right now, my job is this and only this, to make these shoes the best possible shoes that I can. And when I do, I will be able to sell them and I will be able to sustain myself. And right now, my job is to give my customers good pairs of shoes, to be a giver. That's my job. Okay. All right. Let's take time for maybe one more question or comment, and then we do want to go on to the other two items, gratitude and what's it called again, faith. So we have something or not?
We do, and I just wanted to say at this point I'm getting from everyone a steady stream of wonderful questions and comments, so I do apologize to all of those that we don't have time for. It was a question from, now it's so far back, I'm not sure, from Rebecca, about people who really have trouble receiving, and not the caregivers that we already talked about who are just so single-mindedly focused on giving, but people for whom it feels bad, and sometimes they even become angry, or there's just something sort of fundamentally uncomfortable about receiving, which I'm sort of editorializing, but then that kind of takes away from the giver in some way. There's a lot of dynamics going on there that sort of disrupt what you're talking about.
Well, very associatively, I'll give you an example that comes to mind because of a particular situation I'm in now. My 95-year-old father is living with us, and he's having a bunch of health issues right now. And part of the fluidity is how much help does he need? And how much can he do on his own? So at any given moment, one of the questions I sometimes have to ask myself is, when am I doing my father a favor? When I rush over and help my father get up? Or when I say, okay, Dad, yeah, I know, you can do it. And sometimes he has to struggle a little bit. And then he doesn't. So when am I giving to him? Am I giving to him when I help him get up? Am I giving to him when I just stand back and, keep an eye out, but encourage him? So to at least some extent, that is my response. That is, we have to be humble, and we have to know what we think would constitute the right kind of giving for this person might not be the kind of giving that this person wants. Okay? I don't know, people know the Yiddish saying, "Titmen nicht kentoivis." Don't do me any favors. I know you think you're doing me a favor. Right now, actually, you're not, because I know you want to give, but this is not the kind of giving that help now. Now, there are people who really need to receive, and they fight it tooth and nail every step of the way. I wish I had an easy answer for that one. My mother's cousins, their mother, my great aunt, Lena, she did not want to mess with Lena. She was one tough lady. And she also was she wasn't a martyr exactly, but she just didn't want to be fussed over. And they would take her to places, and she would visit members of her family. She would always make chocolate chip cookies. And for some reason, she always put them in old cornflakes boxes. When she'd come to your house, she'd whip out this old cornflakes box full of chocolate chip cookies. It was a thing. That's what she did. And, she'd get to the car. She had like 5,000 packages. And, her sons would say, Mom, we can put in the trunk, right? And she would get into the back and packages would be all over. So eventually what they started saying to her was, are you uncomfortable enough, Ma? I mean, like that's what they could do. What they could do is to say, I wouldn't want to do what you're doing. Doesn't look comfortable to me, but I guess it's your thing. I guess that's who you like to be. Now, there are serious cases. There are cases where people really do need to receive and they fight it tooth and nail, and it's not good. And I don't have a magic formula. So I'm really saying two things. One is I'm saying sometimes we have to look at ourselves. We might think we know what the right giving is, but maybe it's not the right giving. And the other is sometimes can we help reframe it for the other person? Can we help say to the other person, this is not a sign of weakness. This is not a sign of selfishness. Maybe a way of saying it is, I want to help you be that dynamo that you are. That's exactly what I want to do. I want you out there pitching. And you know how we're going to make that happen? I'm going to do this. And then you're going to have it, and you're going to be great. Again, simple and hard. All right, let's talk about gratitude. This is on page 15. We may come back to some of the other stuff. I just wanted to make sure to cover the three major topics. And if we have more time, we may go back to a number of items that we've skipped over. All right, but let's talk about gratitude. Page 15 is in the book, it's 147 under that line of squares. What is the nature of gratitude and thanksgiving? What is their origin in the human psyche? And whence comes that ingratitude, which is the affliction of so many of the human race? Here too, you may recognize the giver and the taker. The giver feels profoundly that he must reject free gifts. And this is exactly what we've been talking about. The desire of his being is to give, not to draw to himself things that are outside him. Consequently, when he does receive anything from anyone, he is immediately prompted to give something equivalent in return. If one is unable to do this in kind, one's heart urges one to repay by giving happiness to that person by way of thanks and appreciation. And that's such a wonderful moment, isn't it? When people give to me and I'm able to give back to them. And one of the things that Rav Dessler talks about earlier, which I don't know if we're going to get to read inside, and so I'm just going to at least mention it briefly now, which is really important, is Rav Dessler says, giving may be a consequence of love, but giving also is a source of love. When we give to others, we increase our love for that person. Think about, well, I know for myself, let's say, in my marriage, one of the ways that I have to connect or reconnect with my spouse when I'm feeling a little distant is to do something for my spouse. Because when I do something for my spouse, that rekindles the connection, and that sense of connection and that sense of giving increases my sense of love for my spouse. So if it's like, if I'm waiting for the lightning to strike or for the love to happen, it may not, but guess what? It's in my hands to make more of it happen. And one of the ways I make more of it happen is by giving. I sometimes have said at weddings, you know, it's a custom at certainly traditional Jewish weddings, to read the ketubah, right, the Jewish marriage document. And if you know the traditional Jewish marriage document, it's full of numbers about how much money the groom is given to the bride, and the bride is bringing in property worth blah 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 blah. And I And I say jokingly, it's a good thing it's in Aramaic, so nobody actually understands what we're actually talking about. Because who wants to hear that under the chuppah? But actually we do, I say, and here's why. Because when we get married, why should I do it? Rav Dessler will say it better than I say it. So let's let Rav Dessler say it. What page is this? Page 14. Okay. I'm going to read the first paragraph under the squares, although I would say it's a little harsh for me, but it's Rav Dessler, and I think there's a lot of truth in it, and I especially like the second paragraph. He says, on this basis, we can understand yet another remarkable fact. Why do we find so often that husband-wife affection does not seem to last? The answer is simple. People are generally takers, not givers. Well, I leave that to you to decide if that's true. When their biological instincts gain the upper hand, they become givers and lovers. But before very long, nature relaxes its grip, and they relapse into a state of taking as before. That's a little dark for me, but I think that it is an accurate description of a mistake that we sometimes make. We mistake passion for love, which is something very different. This change takes place imperceptibly. Previously, they were joined together in an atmosphere of love and mutual giving. From now on, they are takers once again, and each begins to demand from the other the fulfillment of his or her obligations. When demands begin, love departs. This is why I always say to a couple in the joyousness of their wedding day, filling your hearts at this moment is a wondrous desire to give pleasure and happiness to each other. Take care, my dear ones, that you strive to keep this desire always as fresh and strong as it is at the present time. You should know that the moment you find yourselves beginning instead to make demands upon each other, your happiness is at an end. Now, again, and this is the danger of Musar. Like you can read this and say, oh, that's a little bit simplistic, oversimplifying, and it's not that simple. And my reaction is that may be true, but speaking for myself, the fact remains that there is, I say for myself, a deep truth here. That at any given moment in my relationship with my spouse, I do have to ask myself, am I a giver or a taker? Okay. What mode am I operating right now? Okay. And what am I going to do about it, if anything? That's the question should be asked, I think. Certainly Rav Dessler is urging us to ask that question, and speaking for myself, I feel in my own relationship, it is important. It's important to be asking that question and to address it. Okay. So, yeah. So with regard to gratitude then, if we go back, I started reading, where did I, let's go to the last paragraph on page 15, bottom of 147. The giver feels profoundly that one must reject free gifts. The desire of one's being is to give, not to draw to oneself things that are outside of one. Consequently, when one does not receive anything from anyone else, one is immediately prompted to give something equivalent in return. If unable to do this in kind, one's heart urges to repay by giving happiness to that person by way of thanks and appreciation. Of course, then the taker is the opposite. So gratitude comes if I mold myself to be a taker to be a giver, because gratitude is a form of giving. I express gratitude if my attitude towards life, if my orientation in life is giving, if I'm always asking myself, how can I lift you up? How can I make you feel better? What can I do for you? Then one of the ways in which I can do that is through gratitude. So if we think about that in terms of God, we can say the following. God, we read earlier, is the ultimate giver. God is the giver of life. God is the giver of sustenance. To be God-like means to be a giver. And when we can't give by literally giving something to someone else, and when we receive, the path towards giving in that moment is gratitude. The gratitude is the giving of the receiver. That's the form of giving that a receiver engages in. And faith in God means to believe in a God who is a giver and wanting to be God-like. Let's actually look at what Rav Dessler says about giving and faith, and this is on page 20, on the right-hand side. We have explained in the roots of Musar that all thought comes from interest. What a person does not want to think about never enters his mind. It follows that all thought is to some extent tainted by self-interest, and bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. I have only to accept a gift from someone and I can no longer see the truth about that person. Certainly not if my own personal interests are involved. We concluded that our only hope of getting to the truth in matters which the Yetzer Hara opposes, our evil inclinations, is to remove all bias from our heart and to make a supreme effort to seek the truth and only the truth. And here, this is really an important point that deserves a session unto itself, which is that Rav Dessler, like all the Balei Musar here, are really challenging our notion of ourselves as rational beings. Because the Balei Musar say, yes, we are rational, but we are also self-interested. And that's normal. We are self-interested beings. So whenever we're thinking about something, unless we do the hard work of Musar, unless we do the hard work of self-examination, unless we're willing to look at our own biases, we can never really be confident that the conclusions to which we come are true and good. The work, whether you do it through Musar or some other system of self-reflection and spiritual work, without that work, I cannot trust my own thinking, because I'm trapped inside my own self-interest. That's the argument that he's making here. Now, it should be clear that bias and self-interest have their roots in the power of taking, which is the source of all our desires. And since it is bias and self-interest which cloud our recognition of Hashem and our faith in Hashem, the only way to come to recognize the truth about Hashem is to remove taking from our heart and instead to reinforce the power of giving. This is our only chance to awaken within ourselves the interest for truth, which, as we know, is the prime condition for the recognition of truth. We don't want to find truth, we're not going to find it. What is faith? Is it part of human psychology to have faith, to believe? If it was, it would apply to everything that we hear. Only a simpleton believes everything. It is also not right to dignify with the name of faith the intellectual adherence to propositions which we are not prepared to live by. A man can be said to have faith only in those matters in which, in the depths of one's heart, one recognizes one recognizes as true and decisive. It follows that the degree of a person's faith depends on purity of heart. Only one who is basically honest and true to oneself, in Hebrew a ne'eman, can be a person of faith, a ma'amin. Reinforcement of the power of giving removes our inner bias. It follows the more a person busies oneself with helping other people, the stronger and deeper will be the recognition of the Creator. I think this is brilliant, and I think it turns on its head the way we usually think about these things. Right? We usually say, "Oh, I'm a believer. I believe in God. I believe God has a purpose for the world, and so now I'm going to be a good person, and I'm going to give." What I think. Rav Dessler's not here, and I apologize in advance if I'm totally misreading or misrepresenting. But the way I'm going to reword, perhaps present what I see here, is a little bit like something that actually I've written about, which is to have faith in a power greater than myself. For that to happen, I may have to make room in the world and in my world for that power to be there. And if I am a taker, if my whole life is about what can I get for myself, then there is no room in my life for anything outside of myself. Not really. So if I decide to live as a giver, if I decide that my life is about realizing my full self by giving to the world around me, then I have opened myself to the world outside of myself. And I have opened myself to the presence of the Shekhinah, to the divine presence. If I'm not a giver, if I'm not a person who is turned away from the intense engagement and the exclusive, narrow engagement of the self to giving to others, then I haven't created the space to welcome in the divine presence. That is, I think, at least one way of understanding what Rav Dessler is saying. And if that's not what he's saying, then what can I tell you? That's what I'm saying. And I'll just add, and then we'll have time for more questions. Wrote an article for Cross Currents a number of years back, where I suggested the following: that the major ritual commandments, such as kashrut, not working on Shabbat, sexual restrictions, are as much about shaping how we deal with our fellow human beings as they are about our relationship with God. Why? Glad you asked. Because all of these restrictions tell me that my cravings do not come first. Shabbat tells me my craving for power, for creating, for doing, has to have limits. There's one day a week where I have to refrain from doing, refrain from creating. Kashrut, there has to be a limit to what I can eat. Can't just eat anything I want. There are limits. Sexual prohibitions. I cannot engage in fulfilling my sexual desires indiscriminately. There are limits. So what do all of those commandments teach me? They teach me that I am a limited, single human being in a much larger universe. And that I have to, by restraining myself, make room for the world around me, for the people around me. I cannot ride roughshod over the needs of others because of my own desires. And if I mindfully internalize this spiritual discipline that those ritual mitzvot are intended to cause me to internalize, then I will be a giver because I make space for you. And I turn to you and say, what is your need? How can I be of service to you? And I can find God in the world because I realize that I am only this. I am limited. I am finite. There must be something greater than myself. And that greater than myself, that power greater than myself, is God by whatever name you choose to call God. That is the gift of self-limitation and of giving and of gratitude. So let's take the remaining time for questions and comments.
Okay. So this question comes from Hadassah. There were a number of comments along these lines. But I'm going to read it the way she articulated it nicely. Do the Balei Musar ever apply these concepts to communities, to nations, or is the focus exclusively on individuals and their relationships with other individuals? How do we extrapolate from these principles to create norms and values that apply more broadly?
Yeah, that is a very good question and a very challenging question. I mean that in the best possible sense. That is, to put it another way, can you be a Baal Musar and, I don't know, President of the United States, Prime Minister of Israel, Senator? I mean, can you simultaneously, this is how I'm reading that question, maybe wrongly, think correctly, can I simultaneously hope to achieve the high level of honesty with self and be a giver and also get my hands dirty with the realities of community and the inevitable compromises, etc. It's hard, but so first let me say, okay, I'm going to back up a second. One of the differences between the Jesus followers and Rabbinic Judaism as it came to develop, and actually this really also Christianity as came to develop, Jesus' circle was a voluntary community. If you wanted to be a follower of Jesus, you signed on. You don't want to sign on, then you weren't part of the community. These are the standards of the community. You want to follow them? That's great. Otherwise, you don't. When Rabbinic Judaism became institutionalized, it stopped being an intentional community. It became the religion of people who were born into a certain community. And that is reflected in lechatchila and b'diavad. That is reflected by the fact that in halakha there is the aspirational and the acceptable. Because when you have a community that's not a voluntary community, to expect that everyone is going to live at the highest aspirational level, you got to be smoking something to think that that's going to happen. It's not going to happen. And so Rabbinic Judaism implicitly acknowledges that. And it says some of us are going to live at the aspirational level, at the lechatchila level, the best possible level. And some of us are not. But we're establishing a minimum. At least do this much. If you at least do this much, then you are a Torah Jew in good standing, for lack of a better way of putting it. So how does this highly aspirational system interact with a world that's full of compromises and half-truths? At the risk of stating the obvious, there are two ways to go. One is you say, I cannot be part of the larger world. I'm going to create a monastery, conventicle, a yeshiva that's totally removed from the larger community, and the other is to dig in and to say, I know that this community will never resemble a Musar yeshiva, but we can inject into it and we can challenge it with the values that emanate out of that world. Where is that happening? How successfully is it happening? I don't know. But to me, that's the only choice we have. The only choice we have is to be part of the broken world that we're part of, and to be part of the broken institutions that we're part of, and to not accept them as such, beginning with ourselves. And one of the keys to me, to myself, but I have to question myself, is when I start saying to myself things like, well, you have to understand. And I say to myself, no, I don't understand. I don't understand why you're doing it the way you're doing it. And I don't have to understand why you're doing it that way. I have to challenge you and make you do it differently. I'll tell you one thing right now, and I know this isn't exactly the question, but this is something that's really important to me. In our Jewish educational institutions, if I were the supreme leader, okay, and I could determine what was happening in our Jewish educational institutions, I would make sure that at the top of our curriculum would be Musar in some form. And that would include emphasizing to each of our children how beloved they are in God's eyes, how the Mishnah teaches us that each person is obligated to say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for me alone it would have been worthwhile for the world to have been created. That before anything I do, before my grades, before my extracurricular activities, before the college that I got into, I am a person worthy of love. And the second thing would be to teach our children the true meaning of success. And the true meaning of success is to be a giver. That's what it means to be a successful person in this life. A person who is so full of the joy of life itself and is so capable of finding what is good in what one has been given, that one feels that one always has something to give to others. Because I have been taught that I have that which I can give to others. Whatever my profession, whatever my income level, whatever my physical situation, whatever my mental situation, we are all capable of giving so much. This is what we must teach our children. And as far as I can tell, got a lot of work to do in that department. I was an assistant principal at a yeshiva high school. And there was a student, like a C student. And I said to the student, I said, Murray, what do you like to do? He said, I take photographs. I said, bring in your photographs tomorrow. Murray brought in the photographs. They were fantastic. They were beautiful photos. Those photos aren't going to help him on his SAT. Those photos, well, maybe if he, I don't know, yangle it right, maybe it would have helped him get to a good college. But you get my point. My point is, this was a person with a fantastic talent. And he was living in a world where it just didn't matter to anybody else. So he was a nothing. He was a C student. That's who he was. Okay? That's a crime. That's a crime. We should be, if we are religious people and we care about this religious and spiritual well-being of our children, then we should be teaching them the really important things in life. And that is, we were given a gift beyond imagining, the gift of life. And we were given it to be able to give of that gift that we have, and we all have a gift. We all have a gift. To give of that gift to others, because there always are people out there who need our gift. And our educators should be working on helping each and every one of our children, identifying those gifts and helping them learn how to give those gifts to others. That's it. That's it. That's the essence of Jewish education. Sorry, I know I'm getting a little, but this is it. This is it. All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sort of blown away by what you were just talking about, and of course, as a parent, really thinking about that a lot. I wanted just to dial back, a minute and a half. And to wrap us up since we're out of time. First of all, of course, I wanted to thank you for this incredibly powerful session. And just thank you for kind of ending with the exhortation or reminder to all of us that we have what to give, and it's a time of profound need in the world. And we also are most of us are feeling some sense of deprivation. And I think, what you were saying just before the education piece, which was of course connected, but right, to not, to lift ourselves out of a place of feeling deprived by probing to see how we can lift others out of their place of deprivation. So I think it's a beautiful and powerful way to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank everyone for coming and for all your amazing comments and questions, which I will share with Rabbi Diamond, and hope that you'll join us next week. Next week, Dr. Stephanie Sigmund will be talking about ethical wills and looking at some medieval examples. And I think it's a wonderful next step from this to think about, right? Ethical wills are about what values we want to give to the next generation. So I hope that you will all join us then. Thank you again for coming. Thank you again to Rabbi Diamond for this beautiful teaching, and we will see you all again soon.
Be well, everyone.